Welcome to Research Like a Pro with DNA question and answer series. And today we're talking about this great question about adoptive versus biological research. Should you build a separate genetic tree? So let's start by going over the question that was submitted from a DNA study group member. She said, I spent years researching my adoptive father's lineage, but now I'm working to document my biological father's side. As I shift focus to genetic relationships, what is the best way to build a genetic tree on Ancestry or WikiTree? Should I start a brand new tree, adding people only once DNA matches prove a connection? Or should I continue building out my biological father's tree and simply mark DNA ancestors as they are confirmed? So, to create a strictly genetic tree, yes, we usually would only add those confirmed with DNA evidence, but the genetic tree is more of an idea than a product we're trying to create. Most genetic genealogists create a working tree with their traced ancestors, meaning the ancestors we've traced with documentary evidence. And then when we can, we work on confirming these with DNA evidence. So while you could definitely create a separate genetic tree, usually it'll be pretty small until you've had a lot of time to confirm all the documentary research you've done. And usually these genetic trees or traced trees with some people marked as genetic ancestors will need to include a lot of collateral descent lines to help connect matches. And so it's good to think about, what's actually going to be helpful for you. Creating a strictly genetic tree showing only those that you're already done with isn't as helpful as building those that you've traced out and connecting collateral descent lines to help connect matches as they appear. And then also to help you with building your final goal of confirming everyone with DNA would be these through lines and theories of family relativity hypotheses. And for these to work, we need to have hypothesized ancestors. So while the idea of a genetic tree is what we're all aiming for, kind of the in-between working time is a little bit messier with some hypothesized ancestors, just traced ancestors, working on lines of descent and looking at these theories. In the meantime, though, we can use Ancestry's tree tags or notes on whatever tree we're using, like common DNA ancestor, to show that we have a match descending from that ancestor. But to actually prove or confirm someone, you need a written conclusion to meet the GPS. And so to get to that point, you'll want to upload or attach your written conclusion, whether it's a proof statement with documentation, a proof summary, or most of them, especially for more distant ancestors, will be proof arguments. So now let's talk about WikiTree as an option for where to create your tree that you're working toward making it genetically confirmed. And WikiTree has a really cool kind of feature or idea there that you can mark ancestors as confirmed. And the way they do it with one single DNA match is that you find a match and figure out the relationship. And then if it's an autosomal match, your match should be third cousin or second cousin once removed or closer. And so that's how they want you to do it. It has to be a close match. And then if the relationship you found with the trees corresponds with the relationship prediction, such as third cousin or closer from Ancestry or whatever testing company, then you can mark that person, that common ancestor, as confirmed with DNA. And not just the most recent common ancestral couple, but all the ones between you and that couple. So you can mark your parent, grandparent, and great grandparent if you have a second cousin match. So that's kind of how they do it at WikiTree. Now, if you have Y-DNA, you can also mark someone as confirmed with DNA using Y-DNA. And here's an example of how they want you to write the source citation and what to include. And you can read more about this on their help website. But they require that both matching tests be Y37 or greater. So they don't want you matching, Y12 and saying this is confirmed with DNA. It's just not enough markers. And then you're supposed to look at the tip report in family tree DNA, and if it predicts the similar number of generations as you found in documentary evidence between the two matches back to the common ancestor, then you can mark with confirmed as DNA and use a citation like this on the match. So that's how WikiTree has devised a solution for marking people as confirmed with DNA. And in other trees, there isn't really like a system, but there are a lot of people that will go through and mark ancestors as genetic ancestors, or they'll put a little symbol in their tree that says confirmed with DNA and that kind of thing. So now let's talk about how do we know if someone's confirmed with DNA or not, and we'll talk a little bit about ancestry too. So at Ancestry, you can choose which tree is connected to your DNA results. And so someone might have a genetic tree where they only put genetic ancestry, and then they might have their other tree that includes like their adopted parents or step parents. Um, but then if you have a lot of different trees, sometimes it gets challenging to know which tree you're working in the moment. And, oh, whoops, I was supposed to switch over to the other tree. And if you have a lot of trees that have the same people in them, then which one did I update with that source? It can be really hard. So we really recommend one master tree, and that's best for most people and what most people are trying to do. And you can add floating branches to that if you don't know where someone connects, but then hopefully eventually can connect up that floating branch to a common ancestor. I would do that for closer matches, where you're pretty confident you'll eventually find a common ancestor. But within Ancestry, you can mark different relationship types. So going back to the question where you have an adopted father that you've traced and a biological father that you're tracing now, you can add those different types in the tree. So you can add an adopted father and a biological father to the tree, and then you can even set which father is preferred, and that's going to be the one that shows in your tree. So that will display in the tree views. DNA matches will want to see the biological line. Now, this is something that's unclear. If you mark a stepfather as preferred, will the DNA matches only see the biological line, even if the step line is preferred? I'm not sure, but you'll definitely want to have both in there. And then maybe if this is the tree you connect to your DNA results, you might want to consider selecting the biological one as the preferred line. You can test things out and see which one displays by asking your matches. But for through lines to work at Ancestry, you have to have your relationship marked as biological to biological ancestry. And so it seems like from the help documentation at this article here that as long as you have them marked biological versus adoptive, then the through lines will work for the biological ancestry. Now, the default is to mark everyone as biological. So if you add two sets of parents to one person, they'll both be marked biological until you go in there and you change the settings to say step or adopted so that only one shows biological. And so for through lines, it doesn't say anything about preferred parent. That shouldn't matter as long as you have marked one set biological and one set adoptive. And if you have both sets of parents in the tree marked as biological, you could get through lines that go to both sides of the family, whether you get through lines that go to the adopted parents, and it will probably show that you don't have any matches except for like your brother and your sister. But that's because the adopted, grandparent is one generation back, so it'll still show your brother and your sister. But then you won't probably see any matches to the genetic tree of your adoptive parent or the genealogical tree of your adopted parents. So that might happen. And Devin Lee talks about this in her YouTube video. So if you're wanting to understand a little better, she can illuminate that for you about, through lines to both adoptive and biological before marking them as biological versus adoptive. So what it looks like in Ancestry is go to a person. So I went to James Wesley Dyer, who had a stepmother and who his father married when he was 12. And that's because his father and his mother, his biological mother, never married his father. And so they moved away from Tennessee and she stayed in Tennessee. And he lived with his father, and then his father got married again to Mary. And so she's listed as a stepmother. So anyway, the way that you view the relationships or edit the relationships to say step or adoptive is you go to edit and then you click edit relationships. When you click edit relationships, then you get a pop-up here and it shows the parents. And so James Wesley Dyer has one father who's biological and he has two mothers. He has his biological mother and then his stepmother that his father married when he was 12. And so Mary is marked as step. And right now, she's not the preferred parent. So I have the biological parent as the preferred parent. But if I wanted to, I could click make preferred and then the step parent would show. But they'd both still be listed as parents. So when they're both, if they were both listed as biological, then you could get through lines potentially to both of them. So this is one way, another side note, that you could have through lines generate to two different hypothesized parents if you're not sure which is which, by putting them both as biological. Okay, so side note, moving on, let's talk about marking ancestors as genetic. So how do we know when we can mark an ancestor as genetic if we're trying to create a genetic family tree? Well, we need two components. We need some DNA matches and we need some documentary evidence. And when you're working with a grandparent or great grandparent, you have closer matches like first or second cousins, you're going to have a higher certainty that you've got the correct relationship and that you've proven that person is a genetic ancestor. But as you go back in time to third, fourth, fifth great grandparents, you're going to need a lot more matches. And as far as DNA evidence, all DNA matches must be correlated with documents to be marked as genetic. But you can have indirect or negative evidence. You don't have to have direct evidence to be able to make a conclusion about an ancestor being genetic. You can have some DNA matches, some indirect evidence, and put it together in a proof argument. So maybe this doesn't seem too difficult, but there are some complications, some factors, and then the whole idea of meeting the GPS might be different than what some people think of when they think of marking as an ancestor as confirmed with DNA. So the complicating factors are if there's pedigree collapse or endogamy or multiple relationships, it makes it harder to know where is the DNA coming from that you share with that match. Is it coming from, some other ancestors who intermarried with these ancestors? Or is it coming from a different common ancestral couple? So we have to be careful there. And also, if you have small matches with small segments, we have to be aware of false segments and incomplete pedigrees, where if we don't know all 512 of our great 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 grandparents, and we find a DNA match leading back to one of them, and we assume that those are the source of the shared DNA, we could be incorrect because there are 512 ancestors, and if we only know 20 of them, then it could be from one of those, other 490 that we don't know who they are. So we have to be careful with those more distant ancestors that we're trying to confirm with just a single match, especially a small match like 20 centimorgans. Then the genealogical proof standard tells us that we have a lot of components to meet before we can say something's proven and meets this standard. And one of them is a written conclusion, putting everything together. And most of the time, when you see someone putting an icon in their family tree that says confirmed with DNA, they haven't written a conclusion. They've just decided that it's confirmed, and we don't know how they've decided that. So, marking someone as genetic doesn't always mean you've met the GPS. So, you have to kind of decide what you want to do. And do you want to mark someone as a genetic ancestor before you meet the GPS, or do you want to try to write a written conclusion first? And then, of course, we have to understand, when have we proven our ancestor is genetic? And I asked ChatGPT to make this image for me. And at first, I thought it would be great to talk about it as a curve where we need more evidence the further back we go. And so we have a greater burden of evidence when we have smaller matches and less evidence. And proving parents is easier. We just need, like one sibling match and some documents. And then the same with grandparents. We just need a couple first cousin matches and some records, and we're good to go. And it's easy to find vital records that have direct evidence. But as we go further back in time, we need more cousin matches, and there could be problems, and the evidence is often more difficult. So we have to do, more work and find more evidence. So at first I thought this worked out pretty well, but then I thought, it's really the same amount of evidence. It's just harder to get this much evidence from small matches. So then I thought of a beaker as a good idea to represent what we need. And so as we fill the beaker, we have to get to this point to prove the ancestor. And we might get two DNA matches that are first cousins that help fill the beaker halfway with DNA evidence showing that this grandparent couple is correct in our tree. Then we have filled almost the rest of the way with documentary evidence, with vital records and census records with direct evidence. Then the final step is writing a paragraph, a proof summary. And once we've done that, we can meet the top of this line and we have proven the ancestor. So it doesn't matter, whether we're trying to prove a fourth great grandparent or a first great grandparent, we need to get to this line by finding a lot of DNA evidence and a lot of documentary evidence and then having a conclusion that's written. And so why is it easier to get a lot of DNA evidence from close matches? Well, that's because there just are not as many possible relationships when you share, for example, the average for a first cousin, which is 866 centimorgans. There's only 13 total relationship probabilities here. And if you scroll down on the Shared Centimorgan project tool, there's only 10 possibilities highlighted. So we have to figure out which one it is and rule out these other ones. And once we've ruled out these other ones, which shouldn't be too difficult based on age and documents, then we can confidently say this is a first cousin, and the documents also show the same conclusion. So it's just not that difficult to fill up the beaker. But with the fourth great grandparent match, cousin, to prove a fourth great grandparent couple, we might say, okay, we have two fifth cousin matches, just like we had two first cousin matches for grandparents, but these ones only share 25 centimorgans. And so you can see we didn't fill up our beaker all the way to the half point with this. We just I would rather have it be even smaller, but AI made it. So I couldn't get it exactly the way I wanted it. But, I would say two fifth cousin matches would only get us like 1/8 of the way in DNA evidence. And then we have some documentary evidence here too, but it's also further back. So it's harder to get direct evidence that far back. So we have some indirect evidence from the 1830 census where it doesn't even say the name of the child. And we have some proximity on land and tax records. So that gives us some good evidence, but we're still not all the way to the top. And we need a written conclusion to get there and probably more DNA evidence. The proof argument that we write helps rule out other conclusions and helps mitigate pedigree incompleteness. And it gives us space to document all the matches lines of descent. So you can see our beaker is lacking here. So why is it that these two fifth cousin matches don't give us as strong or as much evidence as we need? It's because there are so many possibilities for what a 25 centimorgan match could be. And here alone, we're looking at eighth cousin or more distant. So 30 plus relationship possibilities. And if you scroll down, it's 39 relationships highlighted that it could be. So we have to rule out all of those other possibilities. And the way that we usually rule them out is by getting more matches. And the more matches that we get that share in the ranges that we suspect they should be in, the stronger our evidence gets and the more we can rule out these other possibilities. And so to prove that fourth great grandparent, let's say we add 10 more matches to the original two fifth cousins. So all these little DNA matches in here are adding, and now we're up to at least halfway full with DNA evidence. Then we have a written conclusion. And maybe as we're writing our conclusion, we realize we just need a little bit more documentary evidence. So working in the documents will help us get all the way to the top. And once we've done that, now our beaker is full of evidence and we're ready to say that ancestor is confirmed with DNA. So that's a lot of work, and this is going to take us time. So solutions for the meantime, if we want to try to start marking ancestors as something with DNA, whether or not we're ready to say they're confirmed or proven, we can use some different ideas like the Ancestry and MyTreeTags. I love these because they allow us to put in things like DNA connection or common DNA ancestor. Common DNA ancestor does not say proven with DNA, which I love. It just says, I have a match and the common DNA ancestor that I've found is this person. So it's not overstating the evidence. We can also use things like hypothesis, actively researching, unverified, or verified, custom tags. So there are a lot of options there. And the way that you add a tag is by clicking here, add tags. It opens a sidebar and then you can choose. And then it has like a little explanation of what it means. Now I asked ChatGPT for ideas for custom DNA status tags and it gave a lot of them. And I liked all of these. There were even more. But we can use custom tags like this to let people know where we're at with our DNA research without saying proven with DNA prematurely. So we can say DNA, low matches, some matches, many matches, sparse coverage, cluster forming, no close matches yet, partial support, 3 independent lines, multiple independent lines, more test takers needed, Y test taker needed, mitochondrial test taker needed, pedigree collapse suspected, possible non-parental event, DNA conflict needs resolution. No test takers in this line. DNA evidence only, no docs. Docs only, no DNA. DNA hypothesis, documentary confirmed, DNA supported, working to meet GPS, needs written conclusion. Full documentation, need written conclusion. Proof argument complete, affected by ethnography, multiple relationships. So any of these tags might be helpful and more helpful than just simply saying confirmed with DNA. So the takeaways are that yes, building a genetic tree is the goal, but for now, as we're working on it, it's a good idea um, to not force ourselves to say a match is confirmed before we're ready, and to use MyTreeTags, custom tags, or whatever notes you need to share where you're currently at. And I really like the idea of just putting common DNA ancestor. And WikiTree has these great ideas for using close matches and Y-DNA to mark someone as confirmed. But I would just always keep in mind that a written conclusion is required to meet the GPS of confirming an ancestor to that level. So hopefully that answers the main question of whether or not you should have a separate tree for your genetic. The answer to that was no, I would put everything in one tree and have your step or adoptive and biological relationships all in one tree just for simplicity. And then as far as marking people as confirmed, to not do that before you're ready. All right. Thanks so much for watching.